So there are the most common types of roses that are out there, and it really does make a difference in how some of the care can be taken for wintering some of these. And the most popular ones that are out there for the modern types of roses are the hybrid tea, the floribunda, and the grandiflora. And so with these, we just go over them real quickly. The hybrid tea is actually the one that is the most popular of all the different roses that we have in our gardens for today. They have very large flowers. They can have long stems. They come in all kinds of colors and they're just gorgeous. However, they really don't have a true blue or a black. They are vigorous growers. However, they do need winter protection and pest management practices as well. When we look at the floribunda, they are an intermediate flower size. So they're going to be a smaller type of a rose once it opens up as compared to the hybrid tea. They are slightly hardier than the hybrid tea. They have a great abundance of blooms. That's a smaller scale type of a bush. So it's more of a bushy, shorter type of a rose bush. And it's great if you're going to do mass plantings. So notice that the hybrid says that they do need some winter protection. The floribunda says they are slightly hardier than the hybrid, but they still do need to have some winter protection. And then we have the grandiflora, and those flowers are generally double, as you can see in the picture. That's really pretty right there with the pink edging and the white internal part of the petals. They lack fragrance, which is awfully interesting. And they have flower clusters that are on tall stems. And so we can kind of decipher what type of rose we have if we didn't select them ourselves. So that's just a little bit of a general description of the most modern types of roses that are out there today. So the goal of overwintering is to protect those roses, especially at the union graft. And so most of our modern roses today are going to be grafted. So we have the scion and we have the rootstock. And so the scion is the top part that's going to have the canes and the flowers. And we usually love them for how they bloom, what their color variations might be, but they may not have the best root system for that type of a rose bush. So we'll take a rose bush with really great root system and we'll graft that rootstock to the top of what we really are looking for, which is the beauty of those roses. That graft area does need to be protected for the winter time. So we just want to make sure that we have the roses protected, because if that graft actually has an issue and it actually gets damaged, that rose bush will continue to bloom. However, what happens is that the rootstock itself will actually start sending up new canes. And so whatever that old variety was from that rootstock, those are the colors of the roses that are going to be coming out. So if one year you have these beautiful pink roses and then the next year your roses are a totally different color from what you're accustomed to, chances are that graft had some winter damage to it. So that's one of the main reasons why we want to protect our roses. We also want to make sure that we keep the temperature more uniform throughout the winter, because some of them actually lack the cold hardiness. And so we did see with the hybrids as well as with the floribunda, actually they have better winter protection, but not as much as the floribunda, and the hybrids definitely need to have some of that winter protection. So what does that actually look like? So first of all, we want to get those roses ready for the winter. So we want to make sure that we prune those roses back. So if there's a lot of excessive top growth on our roses, and if we have really tall canes, we want to cut back those canes to about 2/3 of their original height and the growth that they've actually put on for that year. If they're a shorter, more bushier type of a rose bush, where they're going to have a lot more canes, we want to only cut those back about 3/4 of what their height was. So think about how tall those canes are. Do they need to be cut back 2/3 of their height or 3/4 of their height? And then we also want to look to see where are the weak canes growing on that bush. And so we definitely want to take those weak canes out cut them down as low as you could possibly get without damaging the root ball or the graft. And try to get those bad canes out there, those weak ones, because if there's some sort of a disease that's starting in that particular cane, or there's an insect perhaps overwintering, we don't want that. And we don't want it to spread to the rest of the bush. So that's one of the reasons why we want to remove some of those weak canes, not knowing for sure, because it may not bloom really nice next year. Then what we also want to do is remove any of the debris that's underneath that rose bush as those leaves fall from the plant. We want to remove as much of that as we can. If there's any leaves that are still on the bush and just hanging on in general, even though they're not green, they might be brown, we want to go ahead and try to remove those leaves. And the reason for that is that if there's any kind of a disease, such as black spot, that black spot can actually overwinter in the debris that's left underneath that rose bush. So that's one of our best management practices of trying to prevent that disease from returning next year to our roses. So go ahead and remove all the leaves as much as you can. And then we want to look at how do we actually protect the roses. So usually what we'll do is we'll build up a mound around that graft. Now in this picture, the graft is being shown under the ground. So you want to make sure, first of all, that you plant the rose according to how it needs to be. And sometimes our soil will settle and that root graft might actually come above the soil line or be right at that soil line, but we do want to protect it. So you might want to take some soil and just mound it lightly around the top of the bush where all the canes are coming together. And then you'd like to go ahead and maybe put some straw or some evergreen. If you're snipping and cutting back any of your evergreens, or you have some of that that's kind of laying off on the side that you don't know what to do or how to recycle, you can go ahead and use that on top of the soil as well. So we want to mulch around the base of the plant, including that graft, because that's the most sensitive part of the rose for winter damage. The types of mulch, you can use soil, but use soil that's from a different area because you don't want to lessen the soil that's around the bush itself, because we want to make sure all of those roots are protected. You can use evergreen boughs, bark, wood chips, aged sawdust, straw, anything along in that line. If it's not completely decomposed in the spring, we want to make sure that we take the evergreen boughs, the bark, the wood chips away so that it doesn't take away the nitrogen in order to decompose that from those microorganisms in the soil, because we want that nitrogen to be there for the roses to grow well. You want about 10 to 12 inches of the rose bush to be covered. And then throughout the winter, just check on it because things like to settle, and you might want to add a little bit more mulch as you go through the winter season. So every so often, just check through it and see if that needs to be added. And then the timing, we want to add mulch, but we don't want to do it too early. But we don't know exactly what the temperatures are going to be and when all of the leaves are going to fall off of our rose bushes. So we have to be careful. We're informing you now so that you can plan ahead, but you want to keep the stem warm and you want to keep it moist. So continue watering those roses. If you add too much, and once the weather breaks and we're really coming into the fall, they're dropping their leaves, we want to not water so much with those rose bushes because the canes can actually get a canker. A canker is kind of like a sore. So if you do water, and if we're in a drought this winter, water on the outside of that mulched mound so that it doesn't get onto the canes, because if it does, it could cause some different diseases. You want to make sure that if you're really concerned about black spot, there is a fungicide that you could use. Remember, the fungicide is going to keep that black spot in check. It's not necessarily going to kill it. There is no fungicide out there that will actually kill the fungus of any kind. And if you've got knockout roses, they have been bred for cold hardiness, and they do not necessarily have to be winterized in any fashion. So good luck with your roses if you've got them.